In mid-1947, a United States Army Air Force's balloon crashed at a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. Following wide initial interest in the crashed flying disc, the U.S. military stated that it was merely a conventional weather balloon. Interest subsequently waned until the late 1970s, when ufologists began promoting a variety of increasingly elaborate conspiracy theories, claiming that one or more alien spacecraft had crash-landed, and that the extraterrestrial occupants had been recovered by the military, who then engaged in a cover-up. In the 1990s, the U.S. military published 2 reports disclosing the true nature of the crashed object, a nuclear test surveillance balloon from Project Mogul. Nevertheless, the Roswell incident continues to be of interest in popular media, and conspiracy theories surrounding the event persist. Roswell has been described as the world's most famous, most exhaustively investigated, and most thoroughly debunked UFO claim. Events of 1947. The sequence of events was triggered by the crash of a Project Mogul balloon near Roswell. On June 14, 1947, William Brazel, a foreman working on the Foster homestead, noticed clusters of debris approximately 30 miles, 50 kilometers, north of Roswell, New Mexico. This date, or about 3 weeks before July 8, appeared in later stories featuring Brazel, but the initial press release from the Roswell Army Airfield, RAF, said the find was sometime last week, suggesting Brazel found the debris in early July. Brazel told the Roswell Daily Record that he and his son saw a large area of bright wreckage made up of rubber strips, tinfoil, a rather tough paper and sticks. He paid little attention to it but returned on July 4 with his son, wife, and daughter to gather up the material. Some accounts have described Brazel as having gathered some of the material earlier, rolling it together and stashing it under some brush. The next day, Brazel heard reports about flying discs and wondered if that was what he had picked up. On July 7, Brazel saw Sheriff Wilcox and whispered kinda confidential like that he may have found a flying disc. Another account quotes Wilcox as saying Brazel reported the object on July 6. Wilcox called RAF Major Jesse Marcel, and a man in plain clothes accompanied Brazel back to the ranch where more pieces were picked up. Spent a couple of hours Monday afternoon looking for any more parts of the weather device, said Marcel. We found a few more patches of tinfoil and rubber. On July 8, 1947, Roswell Army Airfield, RAF, Public Information Officer Walter Oates issued a press release stating that personnel from the field's 509th Operations Group had recovered a flying disc, which had crashed on a ranch near Roswell. As described in the July 9, 1947 edition of the Roswell Daily Record. The balloon which held it up, if that was how it worked, must have been 12 feet long, felt, measuring the distance by the size of the room in which he sat. The rubber was smoky gray in color and scattered over an area about 200 yards in diameter. When the debris was gathered up, the tinfoil, paper, tape, and sticks made a bundle about 3 feet long and 7 or 8 inches thick, while the rubber made a bundle about 18 or 20 inches long and about 8 inches thick. In all, he estimated, the entire lot would have weighed maybe 5 pounds. There was no sign of any metal in the area which might have been used for an engine, and no sign of any propellers of any kind, although at least one paper fin had been glued onto some of the tinfoil. There were no words to be found anywhere on the instrument, although there were letters on some of the parts. Considerable Scotch tape and some tape with flowers printed upon it had been used in the construction. No strings or wires were to be found, but there were some eyelets in the paper to indicate that some sort of attachment may have been used. A telex sent to a Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, office from the Fort Worth, Texas office quoted a major from the 8th Air Force, also based in Fort Worth at Carswell Air Force Base, on July 8, 1947, as saying that the disk is hexagonal in shape and was suspended from a balloon by cable, which balloon was approximately 20 feet, 6 m, in diameter. Major Curtin further advises that the object found resembles a high-altitude weather balloon with a radar reflector, but that telephonic conversation between their office and Wright Field had not borne out this belief. Early on Tuesday, July 8, the RAF issued a press release, which was immediately picked up by numerous news outlets. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chavez County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office, who in turn notified Major Jesse A. Marcel of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office. Action was immediately taken and the disc was picked up at the rancher's home. It was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield and subsequently loaned by Major Marcel to higher headquarters. Colonel William H. Blanchard, commanding officer of the 509th, contacted General Roger M. Ramey of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas, and Ramey ordered the object be flown to Fort Worth Army Airfield. At the base, Warrant Officer Irving Newton confirmed Ramey's preliminary opinion, identifying the object as being a weather balloon and its kite, a nickname for a radar reflector used to track the balloons from the ground. Another news release was issued, this time from the Fort Worth base, describing the object as being a weather balloon. The military decided to conceal the true purpose of the crashed device nuclear test monitoring and instead inform the public that the crash was of a weather balloon. Later that day, the press reported that Commanding General of the 8th Air Force Roger Ramey had stated that a weather balloon was recovered by the RAF personnel. A press conference was held, featuring debris, foil, rubber and wood, said to be from the crashed object, which matched the weather balloon description. Historian Robert Goldberg wrote that the intended effect was achieved. The story died the next day. Subsequently, the incident faded from the attention of UFO enthusiasts for more than 30 years. Growing interest, 1978–1994. Between 1978 and the early 1990s, UFO researchers such as Stanton T. Friedman, William Moore, Carl T. Pflock, and the team of Kevin D. Randall and Donald R. Schmidt interviewed several hundred people who claimed to have had a connection with the events at Roswell in 1947. Hundreds of documents were obtained via Freedom of Information Act requests, along with other documents such as Majestic 12 that were supposedly leaked by insiders. Their conclusions were at least one alien spacecraft crashed near Roswell, alien bodies had been recovered, and a government cover-up of the incident had taken place. Over the years, books, articles, and television specials brought the 1947 incident significant notoriety. By the mid-1990s, public polls such as a 1997 CNN/Time poll, revealed that the majority of people interviewed believed that aliens had indeed visited Earth, and that aliens had landed at Roswell, but that all the relevant information was being kept secret by the U.S. government. According to anthropologists Susan Harding and Kathleen Stewart, the Roswell story was the prime example of how a discourse moved from the fringes to the mainstream according to the prevailing zeitgeist. Public preoccupation in the 1980s with conspiracy, cover-up, and repression aligned well with the Roswell narratives as told in the sensational books which were being published. Friedman's initial work. In 1978, nuclear physicist and author Stanton T. Friedman interviewed Jesse Marcel, the only person known to have accompanied the Roswell debris from where it was recovered to Fort Worth, where reporters saw material which was claimed to be part of the recovered object. The accounts given by Friedman and others in the following years elevated Roswell from a forgotten incident to perhaps the most famous UFO case of all time. Books. The Roswell Incident, 1980. The first conspiracy book about Roswell was The Roswell Incident, 1980, by Charles Berlitz and William Moore, authors who had previously written popular books on the Philadelphia experiment and on the Bermuda Triangle. Historian Kathy Olmsted writes that the material in this book has come to be known as version 1 of the Roswell myth. Berlitz and Moore's narrative holds that an alien craft was flying over the New Mexico desert observing U.S. nuclear weapons activity, but crashed after being hit by lightning, killing the aliens on board. A government cover-up duly followed. The authors claimed to have interviewed over 90 witnesses. Though he was uncredited, Friedman carried out some research for the book. The Roswell incident featured accounts of debris described by Marcel as nothing made on this earth. Additional accounts by Bill Brazel, son of Mac Brazel, neighbor Floyd Proctor, and Walt Whitman Jr., son of newsman W. E. Whitman who had interviewed Mac Brazel, suggested the material Marcel recovered had superstrength not associated with a weather balloon. The book introduced the contention that debris which was recovered by Marcel at the Foster Ranch, visible in photographs showing Marcel posing with the debris, was substituted for debris from a weather device as part of a cover-up. The book also claimed that the debris recovered from the ranch was not permitted a close inspection by the press. The efforts by the military were described as being intended to discredit and counteract the growing hysteria towards flying saucers. 2 accounts of witness intimidation were included in the book, including the incarceration of Mac Brazel. The book also introduced the second-hand stories of civil engineer Barney Barnett and a group of archaeology students from an unidentified university seeing alien wreckage and bodies while in the desert. Berlitz and Moore's narrative was dominant until the late 1980s when other authors, attracted by the commercial potential of writing about Roswell, started producing rival accounts. UFO crash at Roswell, 1991. In 1991, Kevin Randall and Donald Schmidt published UFO Crash at Roswell. They added 100 new witnesses, altered and tightened the narrative, and included several sinister new twists. Some new details were included, including accounts of a gouge that extended 400 or 500 feet at the ranch and descriptions of an elaborate cordon and recovery operation. Several witnesses in the Roswell incident described being turned back from the Foster Ranch by armed military police, but extensive descriptions were not given. The Barnett accounts were mentioned, though the dates and locations were changed from the accounts found in the Roswell incident. In the new account, Brazel was described as leading the Army to a second crash site on the ranch, at which point the Army personnel were supposedly horrified to find civilians there already. Glenn Dennis was produced as a supposedly important witness in 1989, after calling the hotline when an episode of Unsolved Mysteries featured the Roswell incident. His descriptions of Roswell alien autopsies were the first account that said there were alien corpses at the Roswell Army Air Base. Randall and Schmidt's book sold 160,000 copies. Crash at Corona, 1992. In 1992, Stanton Friedman re-entered the scene with his own book Crash at Corona, co-authored with Don Berliner, an author of books on space and aviation. Goldberg writes that Friedman too introduced new witnesses, and that he added to the narrative by doubling the number of flying saucers to 2, and the number of aliens to 8, 2 of which were said to have survived and been taken into custody by the government. The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, 1994. Randall and Schmidt responded with another book, updating their previous narrative with several new details, including the claim that alien bodies were taken by cargo plane to be viewed by Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was curious about their appearance. The Day After Roswell, 1997. Former Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso reported in his autobiographical book that the Roswell crash did happen and that when he was assigned to Fort Riley, Kansas, in July 1947, 5 trucks of 25 tons and some semi-trailers entered the base from Fort Bliss, Texas. He claimed while he was patrolling the base he was brought into the medical facilities by Sergeant Brown and shown the remnants of bodies that were from an air crash. Philip Klass analyzed his claims line by line and exposed many inconsistencies and factual errors. Competing accounts. The existence of so many differing accounts by 1994 led to a schism among ufologists about the events at Roswell. The Center for UFO Studies, CUFOS, and the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, 2 leading UFO societies, disagreed in their views of the various scenarios presented by Randall Schmidt and Friedman Berliner. Several conferences were held to try to resolve the differences. One issue under discussion was where Barnett was when he saw the alien craft he was said to have encountered. A 1992 UFO conference had attempted to achieve a consensus among the various scenarios portrayed in Crash at Corona and UFO Crash at Roswell. However, the publication of the truth about the UFO crash at Roswell had resolved the Barnett problem by simply ignoring Barnett and citing a new location for the alien craft recovery, including a new group of archaeologists not connected to the ones the Barnett story cited. Don Schmidt held that variations in narratives between different writers was not, however, an essential problem, commenting by way of comparison, "We know Jesus Christ was crucified, we just don't know where." Problems with witness accounts. Hundreds of people were interviewed by the various researchers, but critics point out that only a few of these people claimed to have seen debris or aliens. Most witnesses were repeating the claims of others, and their testimony would be considered hearsay in an American court of law and therefore inadmissible as evidence. Of the 90 people claimed to have been interviewed for the Roswell incident, the testimony of only 25 appears in the book, and only 7 of these people saw the debris. Of these, 5 handled the debris. Flock, in Roswell, Inconvenient Facts and the Will to Believe, 2001, makes a similar point about Randall and Schmidt's UFO crash at Roswell. Approximately 271 people are listed in the book who were contacted and interviewed for the book, and this number does not include those who chose to remain anonymous, meaning more than 300 witnesses were interviewed, a figure Flock said the authors frequently cited. Of these 300-plus individuals, only 41 can be considered genuine first- or second-hand witnesses to the events in and around Roswell or at the Fort Worth Army Airfield, and only 23 can be reasonably thought to have seen physical evidence, debris recovered from the Foster Ranch. Of these, only 7 have asserted anything suggestive of otherworldly origins for the debris. As for the accounts from those who claimed to have seen aliens, critics identified problems ranging from the reliability of second-hand accounts, to credibility problems with witnesses making demonstrably false claims, or multiple, contradictory accounts, to dubious deathbed confessions or accounts from elderly and easily confused witnesses. Flock noted that only 4 people with supposed first-hand knowledge of alien bodies were interviewed and identified by Roswell authors: Frank Kaufman, Jim Ragsdale, Lieutenant Colonel Albert Lovejoy Duran, Gerald Anderson. Duran is mentioned in a brief footnote in The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell and Never Again, while the other 3 all have serious credibility problems. A problem with all the accounts, charge critics, is they all came about a minimum of 31 years after the events in question, and in many cases were recounted more than 40 years after the fact. Not only are memories this old of dubious reliability, they were also subject to contamination from other accounts the interviewees may have been exposed to. The shifting claims of Jesse Marcel, whose suspicion that what he recovered in 1947 was not of this world sparked interest in the incident in the first place, cast serious doubt on the reliability of what he claimed to be true. In the Roswell incident, Marcel stated, Actually, this material may have looked like tinfoil and balsa wood, but the resemblance ended there. They took one picture of me on the floor holding up some of the less interesting metallic debris. The stuff in that one photo was pieces of the actual stuff we found. It was not a staged photo. Timothy Printy points out that the material Marcel positively identified as being part of what he recovered is material that skeptics and UFO advocates agree is debris from a balloon device. After that fact was pointed out to him, Marcel changed his story to say that that material was not what he recovered. Skeptics like Robert Todd argued that Marcel had a history of embellishment and exaggeration, such as claiming to have been a pilot and having received 5 air medals for shooting down enemy planes, claims that were all found to be false, and skeptics feel that his evolving Roswell story was simply another instance of this tendency to fabricate. Air Force Reports, 1994–1997. In response to these reports, and after United States congressional inquiries, the General Accounting Office launched an inquiry and directed the Office of the United States Secretary of the Air Force to conduct an internal investigation. The result was summarized in 2 reports. The first, released in 1994, concluded that the material recovered in 1947 was likely debris from Project Mogul, a military surveillance program employing high-altitude balloons. The second report, released in 1997, concluded that reports of recovered alien bodies were likely a combination of innocently transformed memories of accidents involving military casualties with memories of the recovery of anthropomorphic dummies in military programs such as the 1950s Operation High Dive, mixed with hoaxes perpetrated by various witnesses and UFO proponents. The psychological effects of time compression and confusion about when events occurred explained the discrepancy with the years in question. The Air Force reports were dismissed by UFO proponents as being either disinformation or simply implausible, though skeptical researchers such as Philip J. Klass and Robert Todd, who had been expressing doubts regarding accounts of aliens for several years, used the reports as the basis for skeptical responses to claims by UFO proponents. After the release of the Air Force reports, several books, such as K.A.L. Korff's The Roswell UFO Crash, What They Don't Want You to Know, 1997, build on the evidence presented in the reports to conclude there is no credible evidence that the remains of an extraterrestrial spacecraft was involved. In the 1990s, skeptics, and even some social anthropologists saw the increasingly elaborate accounts of alien crash landings and government cover-ups as evidence of a myth being constructed. Recent interest. Evidence. Although there is no evidence that a UFO crashed at Roswell, believers firmly hold to the belief that one did, and that the truth has been concealed as a result of a government conspiracy. B.D. Gildenberg has called the Roswell incident the world's most famous, most exhaustively investigated, and most thoroughly debunked UFO claim. Flock said, "He case for Roswell is a classic example of the triumph of quantity over quality. The advocates of the crashed saucer tale simply shovel everything that seems to support their view into the box marked evidence and say, 'See. Look at all this stuff. We must be right. Never mind the contradictions. Never mind the lack of independent supporting fact. Never mind the blatant absurdities.'" Korff suggests there are clear incentives for some people to promote the idea of aliens at Roswell, and that many researchers were not doing competent work. UFO field is comprised of people who are willing to take advantage of the gullibility of others, especially the paying public. Let's not pull any punches here. The Roswell UFO myth has been very good business for UFO groups, publishers, for Hollywood, the town of Roswell, the media, and ufology. Number of researchers who employ science and its disciplined methodology is appallingly small. B.D. Gildenberg wrote there were as many as 11 reported alien recovery sites, and these recoveries bore only a marginal resemblance to the event as initially reported in 1947, or as recounted later by the initial witnesses. Some of these new accounts could have been confused accounts of the several known recoveries of injured and dead servicemen from 4 military plane crashes that occurred in the area from 1948 to 1950. Other accounts could have been based on memories of recoveries of test dummies, as suggested by the Air Force in their reports. Charles Ziegler argued that the Roswell story has all the hallmarks of a traditional folk narrative. He identified 6 distinct narratives, and a process of transmission via storytellers with a core story that was created from various witness accounts, and was then shaped and molded by those who carry on the UFO community's tradition. Other witnesses were then sought out to expand the core narrative, with those who give accounts not in line with the core beliefs being repudiated or simply omitted by the gatekeepers. Others then retold the narrative in its new form. This whole process would repeat over time. In September 2017, UK newspaper The Guardian reported on Kodachrome slides which some had claimed showed a dead space alien. First presented at a B-Witness event in Mexico, organized by Jamie Maussan and attended by almost 7,000 people, days afterwards it was revealed that the slides were in fact of a mummified Native American child discovered in 1896 and which had been on display at the Chapin Mesa Archaeological Museum in Mesa Verde, Colorado for many decades. Roswellian syndrome. Prominent skeptics Joe Nickell and co-author James McGaha identified a myth-making process, which they called the Roswellian syndrome. In this syndrome, a myth is proposed to have 5 distinct stages of development: incident, debunking, submergence, mythologizing, and re-emergence and media bandwagon effect. The authors predicted that the Roswellian syndrome would play out again and again, in other UFO and conspiracy theory stories. Recriminations among ufologists. Glenn Dennis, who testified that Roswell alien autopsies were carried out at the Roswell base, and that he and others were the subjects of threats, was deemed one of the least credible Roswell witnesses by Randall in 1998. In Randall and Schmidt's 1991 book UFO Crash at Roswell, Dennis's story was featured prominently. Randall said Dennis was not credible for changing the name of the nurse once we had proved she didn't exist. Dennis's accounts were also doubted by researcher Pflock. Scientific skeptic author Brian Dunning concurs that Dennis cannot be regarded as a reliable witness, considering that he had seemingly waited over 40 years before he started recounting a series of unconnected events. Such events, Dunning argues, were then arbitrarily joined together to form what has become the most popular narrative of the alleged alien crash. Some prominent ufologists including Carl T. Pflock, Kent Jeffrey, and William L. Moore have become convinced that there were no aliens or alien spacecraft involved in the Roswell crash. Alien autopsy hoax. In 1995, film footage purporting to show an alien autopsy and claimed to have been taken by a U.S. military official shortly after the Roswell incident was released by Ray Santilli, a London-based video entrepreneur. The footage caused an international sensation when it aired on television networks around the world. In 2006, Santilli admitted that the film was mostly a reconstruction, but continued to claim it was based on genuine footage now lost, and some original frames that had supposedly survived. A fictionalized version of the creation of the footage and its release was retold in the comedy film Alien Autopsy, 2006. Photo analysis. In an attempt to produce fresh evidence, some researchers used new technology to try to reanalyze photographs of the telegram held by General Remy during his 1947 press conference. Goldberg writes that the results proved inconclusive. While some claimed they could discern wording like victims of the wreck, others claimed they saw turn out to be weather balloons. Overall, there was no consensus that anything was legible. U.S. political interest. On October 26, 2007, Bill Richardson, who at the time was a candidate for the Democratic Party nomination for U.S. President, was asked about releasing government files on Roswell. Richardson responded that when he was a congressman, he attempted to get information on behalf of his New Mexico constituents, but was told by both the Department of Defense and Los Alamos labs that the information was classified. "That ticked me off," he said. "The government doesn't tell the truth as much as it should on a lot of issues." He promised to work on opening the files if he were elected as president. In October 2002, before airing its Roswell documentary, the Sci-Fi Channel hosted a Washington UFO news conference. John Podesta, President Clinton's chief of staff, appeared as a member of the public relations firm hired by Sci-Fi to help get the government to open up documents on the subject. Podesta stated, "It is time for the government to declassify records that are more than 25 years old and to provide scientists with data that will assist in determining the true nature of the phenomena." When asked during a 2015 interview with GQ magazine about whether he'd looked up top-secret classified information, President Barack Obama replied, "I gotta tell you, it's a little disappointing. People always ask me about Roswell and the aliens and UFOs, and it turns out the stuff going on that's top secret isn't nearly as exciting as you expect. In this day and age, it's not as top secret as you'd think." Deathbed confessions. As time wore on, it became harder for Roswell researchers to find new evidence to publish. There was potential though in the prospect of deathbed confessions from those originally involved in 1947. In 2007, Donald Schmitt and Tom Carey published the book Witness to Roswell, which prominently featured a document said to be a sworn affidavit written by Walter Oates, who had written the first Army press release about the Roswell crash in 1947. The document, apparently kept under seal until Oates' death in 2005, described how the 1947 crash debris had been discussed by high-ranking staff and how Oates had seen alien bodies. The claims, however, drew an unimpressed response even from ufologists. Dennis Balthazar said that the document was not written by Oates, and that by 2000 Oates' mental state was such he could not recall basic details about his past, making the detail contained in the affidavit seem dubious. Physicist and skeptic Dave Thomas commented, "Is Roswell still the best UFO incident? If it is, UFO proponents should be very, very worried." The other Roswell. The 1948 Aztec, New Mexico, UFO incident was a hoaxed flying saucer crash and subject of the book Behind the Flying Saucers, 1950, by Frank Scully. The incident is sometimes referred to as the other Roswell, and parallels have been drawn between the incidents. Area 51, 2011. American journalist Annie Jacobson's Area 51, An Uncensored History of America's Top Secret Military Base, 2011, based on interviews with scientists and engineers who worked in Area 51, dismisses the alien story. She quotes one unnamed source as claiming that Joseph Mengele, a German Schutzstaffel officer and a physician in Auschwitz, was recruited by the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin to produce grotesque, child-size aviators to be remotely piloted and landed in America in order to cause hysteria similar to Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds, 1938. The aircraft, however, crashed and the incident was hushed up by the Americans. Jacobson wrote that the bodies found at the crash site were children around 12 years old with large heads and abnormally shaped, oversized eyes. They were neither aliens nor consenting airmen, but human guinea pigs. The book was criticized for extensive errors by scientists from the Federation of American Scientists.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.